Hey, what's up, and welcome to this episode of EST, the podcast for established church leaders by established church leaders. My name is Josh.
My name is Sam, and I'm middle-aged.
Yeah, you are.
I'm 44 this month. 44.
Well, congratulations.
Actually, depending on when this publishes, yeah. I've already turned 44. So, yes, for you, the listener, I am 44 years old. I am perfectly right dab smack in the middle of middle-aged.
Yeah, I guess you are. I hope I'm past the middle of my age because I'm ready to go ahead and get to heaven and just call it. Just call this game and be done.
I'm a pastor. Josh King, I've been doing this 20 years, literally 20 years. I'm tired. Just take me down.
That's right.
I'm tired of these people.
I'm not tired of people. I'm tired of the planet. So anytime Jesus wants to come back, I'm great.
So yeah, it's the Cartman line from South Park. Screw you guys, I'm going home. Right? That's
Again, I have not seen South Park. You quote it all the time, and I have no idea what you're talking about.
I did not grow up watching episodes of South Park. Please don't tell my mom.
Yeah, Nellie Jo's gonna be mad at you.
You know what? My mom, yes, her name is Nellie Jo, and she is amazing. So props to my mom for being a great mom.
Well, we got an episode today. It was a Twitter suggestion by Will Standridge. He is pastoring his first Baptist Church, Geraldine, Alabama. And so,
wow, that sounds old.
Well,
that just sounds old.
That's true. It does sound like an old city, old church. If you're living in Alabama, you need to reach out to Will Standridge.
Yeah, he's great. No. I'm just curious. Geraldine, Alabama? Yeah, there it is. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm just looking it up on Google Maps as I talk. Wow.
It's kind of towards the top, isn't it, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, it is. So, yeah, northeast Alabama, which is actually a beautiful part of Alabama.
Really pretty.
So it's very, very pretty there. But yeah, small town. Will, good luck. Godspeed. Hope you make it.
He's going to do great. He's
That's my advice.
But his suggestion was, what do you do when you're a young pastor pastoring an older church? So what's some of the things to think about? We're going to talk about that, but first, let's talk about church teams.
Got to talk about church teams, sponsor of the show. Church Teams is your answer to all of your church management software problems. They have a solution for just about any church of any size. They do texting, they do giving, they do scheduling. They do a lot. In fact, they do if you have a software problem or something that you think church management software needs to do, then they likely do it. So reach out to them. They've got great pricing plans, and they're offering a free trial for our listeners. So est.church is the place to go to get that. So again, est.church, just the name of the show. And it'll take you right to that landing page. Fill it out and reach out to them. We love them. Absolutely love working with them. Love their products, their solutions. I love their team. They've got a great back end to help you out. So est.church is the place to go get that trial.
Yeah, the very first thing you should do if you're pastoring a church older than you is go to church teams. Then the rest of the show.
That's right. Yeah. That's step number one before you do anything. Yeah, go sign up for all their stuff.
Pause the show, go do it now, and then come back. All right, so what's next? What's next on our we've got one more hint at the very end of this show, so stick around. We've got another hint. And yes, it's a sponsor. What's the first thing?
Yeah, Upward. Upward's great. They know this world. They know this world really well. But we'll get to Upward at the end of the show. Yeah, the first thing I'll say, okay, so you're a younger guy, younger gal, you're in an older church. What do you do? Step number one, I mean, obviously the cliche advice is true, love the people, but there's more to it than that. I think the first thing you got to do is you have to realize that if you're talking about older generations, they tend to be more loyal to an institution like the church, but they also tend to be less flexible. Now, that's partly due to age, because you just get less flexible as you get older. Physically, you can't touch your toes anymore. But that you get entrenched in a certain way of life, and that it really happens to anybody. I'm there. The older I get, the less I want to know. I'm like this old cranky millennial. I'm just like, world's screwed up. I just want out. Come quickly, Lord Jesus, as you said earlier. But you have to work with that. You have to work with who you have. So part of, being a pastor of a church is, you can dream about where you want it to be. Sure, that's part of your vision, but you're never going to get people where they're supposed to go unless you love them where they are. So you got to figure that out first, and you just have to know that, they are just, if you have a church that's 65 plus, like your average age is 70, you just have to know it would be an unusual situation if they're really, really flexible with whatever. Like that's typically not the case.
Yeah, and in general, groups of people are less likely to change. And the church those people joined a certain church with a certain feel and a certain ethos to it, a certain vibe, if you will. And now you're coming in and you're trying to change that. That's not what they joined. So on some level, I would say there's a valid, just human response to change. And so if you are pastoring a church of people that are primarily older than you, then it's not a bad thing. Just don't focus on that. And my advice to you is this is a very long ball game. It is not 1 hour long. You don't lead a church successfully in 1 year or in 1 quarter. You lead a church successfully in 25 years, in 30 years. That's really where the finish line is, somewhere down in that area. So if that's where you're going to go, then their lack of flexibility, regardless of their age, but in particular, if they all happen to be older than you, their lack of flexibility is just a season. It's just a part of the beginning of this work. So pace yourself, discern, discover, relax a little bit, and enjoy them. Because the other side of this, I would say, is that you only have them for a short period. I met with this lady. She's one of the oldest ladies in our church. She has so many great stories. And her grandfather was just a hero within our particular tribe of Christianity. And she gave me his biography, and I'm reading it, and then she's telling me more stories and stuff like that. And it kind of hurt my heart a little bit to think that we only have her for a short period of time. And too many leaders in churches just want to run past her. I do think you need to change. I think you need to move. We need to reach. We need to be thinking about the next generation. But value the time you got right now, because it's a good gift, and just be appreciative of it.
Ask them their stories. Oh my goodness! If you can get that oldest generation to talk, they have experienced so much, and I love sitting down and just asking questions like, what's the most exciting thing you think you've done in your life? What's the craziest thing that's happened to you? Tell me about, a particular era. What was it like during the civil rights movement? And just hear their story. They lived it. So it's one thing to read about it, in a history book. It's another thing to talk to somebody who can say, well, I was there. So I would just say another thing to do is to try to live in their stories and bring their stories back. The positive side, use civil rights as an example. Oh, wow, you stood up for civil rights at a time when it wasn't popular to do that. Oh, you were part of a particular movement. Oh, you were in, goodness, I was talking to a member here, and I don't want to reveal too much, but basically I asked, well, tell me about, your upbringing. Tell me about what that was like. She was like, well, I was part of that original Haight-Ashbury group. You ever heard of that? And I'm like, yeah, I have. Why don't you explain that? She goes, well, I did a lot of drugs, but, and then she told me all these stories, and I was just like, she's a believer now. God has blessed her. She's faithful. It's just like, okay, you see movies about this. Like, you see movies about this.
Yeah.
You were there. You were literally there. But that was, sometimes you sit down with people and they want counseling and you just kind of work through stuff and you're like, okay, this took a turn that I just never, that was one of those where I'm talking to somebody like,
Yeah.
this took a turn where I was not expecting it to go. But unless you ask, unless you genuinely ask, you're not going to get those stories out of them. They're just not going to tell them unless you pry a little bit. So I would say, even though people are less flexible when they get older, which is the case, that'll be the case of our generation too.
Yeah,
And if you
everybody.
can pull those, if you can pull those stories out of them, you'll see something there that you will value. You will absolutely value.
I had
Which gets us
a
to
lady once. She actually started her story with like, I was going to tell you about this, but I want you to know I was drunk and high for most of it, and I just lost it. I thought that was so funny. She's like, I just want you to know I was drunk and high for most of this, but it was a funny story. So anyhow, all right. What's the next thing when you're pastoring a church that's older than you?
yeah, just know that older generations communicate differently. If you're like, yeah, just DM me, they're going to be like, what, DM you? What are you talking about? And I think most people know this. You can text your own generation if you're younger, and people are okay with it. In fact, a lot of people would prefer a text. A lot of times with the older generation, they much prefer a phone call. And that extra time can go a long way with them. And by extra time, I'm really talking about 10 or 15 minutes. And the people in your church that have been there forever, they've earned that extra time. They deserve that extra time from their pastor. So I would say give them that extra time to communicate to them. Yeah, it can be. I will admit it can be frustrating when you realize you want to make a change in the church, and it's like there are 10 people that I'm going to have to talk to about this. I know the 10 that I'm supposed to talk to about this, and they're all going to want to talk about it for 30 minutes. And you do the math in your head, that's like 5 hours of my week. But it's worth it. And when you see them accept the change willingly, knowing that they can trust their pastor, that time's always worth it. So I would just say, yeah, they communicate differently, and that's not a bad thing. You just gotta. We talk about meeting people where they are, right? Learning a whole new
Sure.
language in a cross-cultural setting. Well, why can't you do that with your older generation? You should do that with your older generation.
Yeah. So the first thing is that they're less flexible, but less flexible also means more stable, and that's actually good. That's a nice thing. And the second thing is that they communicate differently. You know what I always just thank God for? Whenever I am stopped, it's usually I'm going a million miles an hour, and somebody wants to stop and talk for 2 minutes, which usually turns into an hour and a half. Whenever that happens, I think to myself a couple of things. One of the first thoughts I think is, this is a sanctifying moment where God is using this person to help me slow down, to enjoy the day, to enjoy the moment, to hear story, to communicate, to just listen. And that's not a bad thing. And I need that. I need a bunch of speed bumps, because otherwise I'm just going to go. I'm just going to go. And so God sends that. I love that. I'm a big advocate of also being very respectfully assertive. And so being respectful of your own time and things like that. So, if you are going a million miles an hour, but you have somewhere you have to go, it is fine to say, look, I love you. I want to meet with you. I can't right now. Can we schedule something tomorrow? I think that that's the part that really sort of eats up younger ministers and pastors, because they feel like they cannot say that. I just want to say you should say that. Respect your time, respect their time, and communicate the same way that you would to other people. And I find that most of the folks that I deal with in the older generation, and this may be shocking to some people, there are one or two just cranky curmudgeons that just want you to get in line and do exactly what they say. The vast majority of them are really okay with the fact that I'm a millennial and they're not. And they're okay with, like, look, I'd rather have a phone call. He sends out emails, but if I call him, he'll talk to me, that kind of thing. So, they're okay with realizing he's going to do more social media stuff than I do. That's fine. So don't assume that just because they're not necessarily getting on board with something that they're against the way that you're doing it. I really don't think they are. They just communicate differently. When I was communicating about some social media strategy that we were going to do with some folks here in our church, I told them, I said, look, if you're not on Facebook, it's fine. don't get on Facebook. You don't have to. In fact, it's toxic. It's a horrible place to be. So you don't have to be on Facebook. We're going to print this newsletter out. We're going to have it available. So you don't have to worry about missing things. And so I'm considering them and letting them know they're not going to be left behind. They are a part of this. I want them to be a part of this, but we're also going to do this other thing over here. So I would just say, don't assume that they are against what you're doing just because that's not what they do, any more than you're against what they're doing when it's not what you do.
Completely agree. And we will print out hard copies of reports and make them available to a certain segment of the church. Most of our communication is digital, and we have done away with most of our printing costs because we know when we print something, we know we only need 25 copies of something. But it's worth that extra effort because the people that don't have a computer, because they just don't want a computer, they still get the information. So I would encourage you to continue doing that. And I would do it all the way down to that last person. If you got one person that needs a hard copy, print it off for them. That effort will go a long way. All right, you came up with this one, so I got to give you credit. The older generation is not your enemy. Don't treat them that way.
Yeah. Stop seeing it like you versus this generation or that generation or whatever you call them. Make sure you're calling them something respectful. But whatever you're calling them, it's that mentality. A lot of times I think a lot of times the tension happens in our own minds. I've seen this more honestly in the reverse, where there's a group of people that get together and they've decided that the pastor is out to get them. And then everything after that the pastor says or does is offensive, is attacking. And the reality is he wasn't ever out to get these people, and that sort of stuff. And so I think it can be true in our own hearts. We got to remind ourselves that there was probably just a misunderstanding, or there was probably just a difference in communication style. They are not your enemies, regardless. If let's say you're a senior pastor and you're pastoring a church that has some people that are younger than you, those younger folks are not your enemies, and the older folks are not our enemies. So I think this is a mental thing, church leader, that you need to get in your mind. If you're a student minister, the senior adults are not against you. I promise. They're really not. They may not understand everything you're doing, but you don't understand everything they're doing. So bridge that gap instead of just lobbing some bombs across the ravine there.
Yeah, that's a good word. The us versus them mentality in the church.
Oh, it's bad.
It could be something as a doctrinal divide. That's a tertiary doctrine. It can be generations. It could be worship style. It could be Sunday school versus small groups. I mean, goodness, there's so many ways that we can. If there is a way to divide it, Southern Baptists will find a way, right? So that's our tribe. I know many of our listeners are not Southern Baptists, but
and I bet they're screaming, "Oh, us Methodists can do it too." I mean, like every denomination just figures out a way to fight over things.
And indeed. But you don't need to do that in your church. You don't need to if you set it up as us versus them generationally, well, you'll get what you ask for. So you need to go into your church, or if you've been there a while, change your posture. It's not young versus old. It's not. We're all in it together. And if you take the posture of unity and you lead out with unity, 99% of your people will follow you there. Because that's what most people are looking for. I mean, is there somebody who goes to a church to find the fight and the controversy? Sure. Probably, that's the same person that does that at the HOA, the Homeowners Association. That's the same person that goes to the school board meeting and does that.
Right,
They're there to find a fight. That's just their personality. But the vast majority of people, they don't want disunity. It makes that agitation bothers them. So take the posture of unity, and most of your people will follow you in that unity with most things. Just don't do the us versus them, which gets us to both and strategies. Now, we kind of brought that up a little bit with the newsletter example of communication.
Yep.
But I will expand this out a little further. One way that we do this at West Bradenton is with groups. We have a traditional Sunday school model. We have offsite groups. We have age segmented groups. We have small groups that meet for a season. They're closed groups for 8 weeks or 10 weeks or 12 weeks. And that strategy, it's entirely messy. And I wish I didn't have to do it. Frankly, it'd be a lot simpler. My job would be a whole lot simpler. My life group director his job would be a whole lot simpler if we just had one kind of group. But it doesn't benefit our church to do that. Our older folks prefer a lecture style, master teacher model, open group Sunday school class. So that's what we do. I can't tell you how many horror stories I've had of pastors going in to Sunday school classes and saying, well, we're going to be small groups now and all of you need to meet in the home or whatever it is. Like, it's not going to work. When you're working with an older generation, almost every single time, if you will just add to what you are currently doing instead of taking away something, it usually works. Not always, but it usually works. What say you?
I agree largely. I think that there is probably some, level, like when it comes to worship, I think the church should pick a style and be, this is who we are. I think that I've done something similar where we had a unified curriculum. However, the curriculum broke into two divides. And I always said, look, if you're more comfortable, you like rows, use this guide. If you are more comfortable and you like circles, use this guide. And it's the same curriculum, but it was built differently for those two groups. So I think that there is some variations you can do, making sure that those variations don't drive the mission or the vision, but they can help with it. And we mentioned the idea of communication strategy. So like emailing the newsletter, but also printing it out and making it available in the Sunday school boxes or at the Welcome Center or something for those. So you're adding both and, doing the both and situation. And you're going to do that in as many areas as you can that don't disrupt the mission and the vision of the church. Calling people, regardless of their generation, to change is not a bad thing. And it is part of being a pastor or being a shepherd. No shepherd can shepherd sheep and leave them just where they are. They're going to have to move. They're going to have to change. So that's not wrong. You don't want to avoid and not ever do the change, but you're definitely going to want to do both and where you can. I think newsletter communication strategies is a good one there. I think your small group illustration is a good one there. I think having different kinds of meetings, like maybe holding the meeting a couple of different times instead of just one time that one group can meet. You may want to have it a couple different times if it's that kind of meeting to have. So, that I think both and is a great strategy so long as it is a strategy that supports a unified mission.
Yeah, good point. Lastly, just be humble, which is really hard. Let me just speak for myself. I thought I was humble when I was 20. I started pastoring when I was 24 bivocationally, and then went full-time when I was 26. And if you would have talked to the 26-year-old version of me, are you humble, Sam? I would have said, well, humble people don't have to brag about it, but yeah, I guess I'm humble. And I was not. And I look back now as a 44-year-old man, and I'm like, I was an idiot. Oh, man, what an idiot. And I'm sure I'll look back in 20 years on myself now and just say, idiot. And then I'll get into heaven, and I'll be like, I'm not an idiot anymore. Praise God, I've been glorified. But I would just say as best you can, because it's hard. It's hard when you're young. You've got drive, you've got vision, you've got things that you want to do. You see the change. You know how to reach your own generation, and you feel like there's all these hurdles in front of you, and you got to push through them. And I get it. I was there. But I would just say, as best you can, try and take the leaders. If you're a young person in an older church, try as best you can to be humble.
I think it's a great word. Look back to Josh 26 minutes ago, that guy was an idiot. I'm just constantly reminded of I don't know anything and I'm constantly learning. And people of an older generation can teach you so much. I would just say balance your humility with confidence. There's the prideful, arrogant pastor who never learns anything, but then there's also the pushover pastor, and both of them are damaging to a church. And one of my pet peeves is these people who they lead churches and they're like, well, these senior saints have given so much to the church, and so we're just going to keep letting them do whatever they want to do. I really don't care what the demographic is. You're the shepherd. You're the pastor. You lead. And so if they happen to be a bunch of senior saints, or they happen to be a bunch of millennials, or if you got an entire church of 4-year-olds, I don't know how that's working, but if you do, then you are a leader. So lead. And they need you to lead. They want you to lead. Spiritually, that's what God has placed you there to do. So humbly, confidently lead. Don't be arrogant. Also, don't be a pushover. And humble and pushover are not the same thing. Humble means, let me hear, let me listen. Okay, great. This is the decision that we're going to make, and we're going to stick to it, guys. Come on, let's go. We can do it. That's humility, as opposed to this is my way, or you got to go. And to be honest with you, all of the stuff that we share today, you're going to have one or two in every generation, but this one's particularly about the older generation. One or two that we call a curmudgeon that, man, they'll take your humility and try to abuse you with you. They'll take your decisiveness and say that, well, he just always runs wherever he wants to run. And they'll take your changes and say that you're being disheartened towards that generation. You got to let that just roll off your back. That's more about their heart than yours. So long as you know that is not what I am doing. I'm loving these people. And so I never want to give license for the abuse of a pastor because that happens too often. And if you're in that situation, man, I feel for you. I've been there. I'm not there now, but I have been there. And so I just pray for you, but lead confidently and love the people.
And call Upward Sports. They can not only bridge your church to the community, they can bridge all generations. Mm-hmm. They are the world's largest Christian youth sports organization, and they will come alongside your church. They will help you advance your mission. They will help you promote Jesus by doing sports as a ministry tool. And I love this because if you're in an older church, maybe you're wondering, how do I reach the community? How do I get families here? This is the way to do it. They have an incredible program that is really turnkey for you. And they can work specifically with your church with whatever constraints or limitations you have. Even if you don't have a gym, if you have a field or a parking lot, hey, they can set it up for you. And for our listeners, they are being extraordinarily generous. They are still offering this 2024 sports startup grant of $500. So go to upward.org/churchanswers, schedule your call with them. And in doing so, if you walk through their process, start the program, you'll get a $500 sports grant. I mean, that's not only do they sponsor the show to help us do what we do so that you guys can get this free, they are offering this grant as well, which I think is tremendously helpful to all of those of you who are listening. So upward.org/churchanswers is where to go to get it. Upward.org/churchanswers.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening. Hey, in the spirit of this episode, I want to go old school here. Pull out your phone, call one of your friends who is a church leader, and on the phone, like verbally, say, hey, have you listened to EST? There's a show there that I think would really help you out. So let's do this old school. No texting, no social media. Just go ahead and call them up and let them know about the show. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Upward Sports equips churches to run self-sustaining sports ministries in their communities. Whether you're a sports fanatic or on staff at a church, Upward Sports will give you all the tools you need to run a first-class sports ministry that allows you to reach families in your community. Upward Sports offers basketball, soccer, flag football, cheerleading, volleyball, baseball, and softball through league and camp offerings. At Upward Sports, we want to help your church make a difference and give you increased opportunities to share the gospel. Learn more today at upward.org/churchanswers.